Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing at Ben Gurion International Airport in a few minutes. The weather's always clear, the ground temperature 72 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 25 in centigrade. I wish you a pleasant stay in Israel. Finally in Israel, we're back to the landscapes we've known, have read about and dreamed about. Welcome to Israel. Welcome to the land of changing landscapes, of modern vitality and ancient tradition. Traditions like hospitality, the oldest tradition of all, forged here by the Bedouin in the desert, only a few miles from the modern metropolis. Hospitality is at the heart of the nomadic traditions, the same traditions from which the ancient children of Israel were born. A stranger is a king when the Bedouin is his host, guaranteeing safety, providing food, and a place to sleep. It was in a tent, much like this tent, that Abraham, the father of the three great religions, heard the voice of God, who sent him on the greatest test of all, to sacrifice his son, his beloved son Isaac, on Mount Moriah. But God stayed Abraham's hand, sending a ram to be sacrificed instead of Isaac. And out of the top of Mount Moriah grew the holy city, Jerusalem. After 7 centuries, King David faced the walled Jebusite town, ordered by the Lord to conquer the city, but to avoid all bloodshed. He solved the problem by leading his men through the secret tunnels of Gihon, the water supply of ancient Jerusalem. And he reached what the Bible calls the citadel of Zion, and made it his city, the city of David. In the Jerusalem of our day, the ancient tunnels have been reopened, and you can walk today through the very channel which after David was expanded by King Hezekiah to become the Siloam Tunnel. You can touch the very stones of the ancient citadel of Zion. Or pray at the site of the traditional tomb of David on Mount Zion. Over the centuries, the town grew into one of the great metropolitan cities of the ancient world, as can be seen in this model at the Holy Land Hotel. Palaces, theaters, and colosseums were built by King Herod to please his Roman patrons. Herod rebuilt Solomon's temple into the grandest of all his buildings. But Rome sought to expand its empire and marched on Judea, conquering Jerusalem with all the bloodshed that King David sought to avoid. and the flames that destroyed the temple in the year 70 were the fires that sent the Jewish people into exile, into 2,000 years of homeless wandering. Now, with the archaeological excavations in Jerusalem, you can touch the very stones that were once part of the walls of the temple. You can stand before the closed gates that were once the entry to the shrine. You can ascend the flight of stairs that led through the ancient stone gates to the temple. And walk to the Kotel, the western wall, the last remaining vestige of the Second Temple. The place to which Jews have turned for 2,000 years, with sorrow over their exile, with hope for redemption. Tradition says that a handwritten note with a request to God, stuffed into a crack of the wall, will reach its destination. And at night, says the legend, a white dove comes sailing down over the wall, cooing its sorrowful song, mourning the destruction of the Holy Temple. Jerusalem is a walled city, the home for believers in three great monotheistic religions. And to enter the soul of the city means entering through one of its gates. Damascus Gate, Suleiman the Great's passage to the north, the gate that leads to the market, where, as happens so often in this land of ancient and new, east meets west, the mysterious and the exotic, colors and smells that could only exist here in the Muslim Bazaar. Jaffa Gate, used by all. It's the main entrance to the old city of Jerusalem. In this tower, say the legends, King David strummed his harp, chanting his magnificent psalms. The bullet-scarred gate on Mount Zion leads to the Jewish quarter. Here, the Jewish community of old was renewed in our time, built upon and alongside the ancient remains that date back to the time of the temple. Once the legionnaires marched along this street, the Cardo, the most elegant of Jerusalem's shopping venues in Herod's time. Today it's a mall full of shops and studios where Jewish craftsmen and artists, using ancient and modern motifs, display their work. All these cobbled streets lead to the heart of the Jewish quarter, the Western Wall. Through Dung Gate, one reaches the Temple Mount, the same Mount Moriah where Abraham faced God's test, and from where, say the Muslims, the Prophet Muhammad rose to heaven, riding his white horse. Here beneath this golden dome is the very rock, they say, on which Abraham stood, and from which Muhammad rose. And 4 times a day, Muslim believers come to face south toward their holy city of Mecca and to pray. The walls are covered with mosaics, interwoven with verses from the Holy Quran. Allah is eternal. Allah is merciful. Standing at the southern edge of the compound is the silver-domed Al-Aqsa Mosque, built as a memorial to commemorate the famous night flight of the Prophet Muhammad from the main mosque in Mecca to this traditional site. For the Christians, St. Stephen's Gate, also known as the Lion's Gate, is special. Here on Palm Sunday, the believers follow in the footsteps of Jesus to the Holy Sepulchre. The legend says that God sent an angel with 10 measures of beauty for the world, and 9 of them fell upon Jerusalem. For the Jews, these closed gates of mercy are the place through which the Messiah will come. And when the Messiah comes, the dead will rise from their graves. So opposite this place, on the ancient Mount of Olives, for centuries Jews have made their final resting place. A cemetery close up to the city, in view of the holiest sites, and from the tombs they will rise when the gates of mercy are finally opened for the Messiah. Jerusalem, a city of faces and faith, of creativity and belief, of the very old and the very new.
Hello.
An island amidst this bustle is Mea She'arim, the most religious of Jerusalem's Jewish neighborhoods, where life from birth to death is devoted to God through study and prayer. Atop one of the hilltops of Jerusalem is this strange domed building, the Shrine of the Book. Inside, in its center, a tree-like form symbolizes the tree of life, and it's surrounded by a glass case containing 2,000-year-old Hebrew scrolls, the oldest in the world, found in the Judean desert. And in its center, a vision, Isaiah's prophecy. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as chief among the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. At the city's edge, the Judean desert, where the prophets went for inspiration, home for the Bedouin and the stones, the sand and the wind. It's a barren landscape that leads to the lowest place on the face of the earth, the Dead Sea. Along the shores, from mountaintops below sea level, one can peer into the caves and discover a 2,000-year-old ghost town where the Jewish hermits, known as Essenes, escaped from Roman-occupied Jerusalem. They lived in the desert, and they wrote their scrolls, hiding them in clay jars stashed in the Qumran caves, to be known 2,000 years later as the Dead Sea Scrolls. North of the Dead Sea is the city of Jericho, the oldest continually inhabited city in the world, an oasis of sparkling colors in the pale, dry light of the Jordan Valley. Here in the bowels of this ancient town are the remains of a city 6,000 years old, perhaps the remains of the very walls that Joshua made to tumble down. Jericho's dry climate and warm sun made it the natural winter resort for the wealthy citizens of Jerusalem. Kings built winter palaces, like this Umayyan palace of the 7th century, where King Hisham brought his court. And here, beyond this grove, beneath this clay-walled house, is a mosaic floor from a 6th century synagogue. The Hebrew inscription wishes what has long been the desire of all: peace unto Israel. Just south of Jericho, the Dead Sea lies flat and shimmering, a sea in the midst of the desert, a wonderland of strange forms created from salt, water, and wind in the blazing sun. Once the sea filled the entire basin, but over the years the water receded, until now only the surrounding mountains and pillars of salt and minerals remain as evidence of the ancient ocean. But in this land of contrasts, yet another oasis, even more surprising in its abundance than Jericho. This is the Spring of David, where the young shepherd escaped King Saul's wrath. It's known as En-Gedi, a lush and enchanted reserve in the midst of the Judean desert. Inspired by the natural abundance that God put down here next to the Dead Sea, a group of kibbutzniks sought to fulfill the dream of making the desert bloom. Kibbutz En-Gedi, one of 250 kibbutzim in Israel, where the members of the kibbutz share their work, their food, their resources, living together, bringing up their children together, to make a new society of equality, a healthy society. To create a direct link with the past, the kibbutzniks here brought back to this region the date palm. Out of the bubbling springs and the blazing sun were created the famed mud baths of the Dead Sea. Since the days of the Roman emperors, the sea's mineral-rich waters and deep black mud have been a soothing balm for aching muscles and a proven treatment for skin problems. Nowadays, hotels have sprung up along the beaches of the Dead Sea. Out of a sea named for death comes health. It's more than a rock and more than another tourist site. It's a symbol of perseverance, of faith in adversity, of the independence of the Jewish people, Masada. Here, Herod built a palace that was an impregnable fortress. Here, zealot fighters for Jewish independence made a last stand against the enemy. Here, the Romans built their camps to lay siege. Here, 2,000 years later, one sees the huge stone and sand ramp the Romans built to climb the mountain to invade the fortress where a few hundred Jews were to choose death over slavery. And here in this synagogue, they threw the lots that provided their faith. Today, the courage of Masada's defenders serves as inspiration for youngsters about to become bar mitzvah. And for army troops who receive their weapons and a Bible, making their solemn promise that Masada shall not fall again. Heading south now on the road through Israel's Wild West. Many a Hollywood Western has been made in these canyons, on top of these mesas, and through these valleys. This is Israel's Negev, the eastern desert of the Great Triangle that makes up Israel's south. And what better place to arrive after a long trip through the desert than the city of Eilat. Here, the mountains and the sea kiss in a romance that's intoxicating and contagious. The serenity of the underwater world of technicolor fish and plants is only a snorkel dive beneath the surface. Where recreation means everything from swimming, sailing, sunbathing, to a nightlife of dancing and romance. Eilat is also the most peaceful part of Israel's wild south. Not far north of Eilat, on the way back to the center of the country through the Negev Plains, a remarkable wildlife preserve has been created, called the High Bar. It's a place where all the animals mentioned in the Bible are being brought to live in the open, in their natural habitat, returning the creatures of the Bible to their homeland. The desert has long inspired mankind. Moses, leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, heard God's call in the huge empty spaces of the desert. And in modern times, a new great leader of the Jewish people found his inspiration in the desert as well. David Ben-Gurion and his wife Paula are buried here in kibbutz Sde Boker, overlooking the Negev desert he believed could be made to bloom. It was in this humble cabin at kibbutz Sde Boker that Ben-Gurion retired as his final act of leadership. Here at kibbutz Sde Boker, he wrote his books, worked, like all the kibbutzniks, as a shepherd. Ben-Gurion inspired many young Jews to come to the desert and make it bloom. They worked hard, finding water far below the surface of the land, learning to use the water efficiently, planting vineyards, almond groves, and pomegranates, fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah that the desert and the parched land would once again rejoice and blossom. And Ben-Gurion's vision came true, reliving the ancient prophecy of fields blossoming in the harsh landscape. Cities too bloomed in the Negev. This is a new town called Arad, barely 20 years old. It's a planned town, designed around a central square where the residents meet to shop and to gossip. Only light industry is allowed to keep the city's marvelously clean air fresh and free of pollution. And an ancient town was revitalized. Beersheba, the city of Abraham. But Beersheba hasn't lost all of the old ways. Once a week, the Bedouin, and anybody else looking for a bargain, gather in the marketplace. East meets west. Ceramics, copper, carpets, cloth and camels change hands alongside the more modern means of Western life. Northwards, through the Judean mountains that Abraham crossed, we reach a valley in a town called Hebron. Behind these mammoth walls, Jews and Muslims pray, for inside is the cave, the tomb of the patriarchs. Here, Abraham and his wife Sarah, Isaac and his wife Rebekah, and Jacob and his wife Leah are buried. Herod built the monument, modeling it after the Great Temple in Jerusalem. Further north, a few minutes south of Jerusalem, is Bethlehem, surrounded by shepherds' fields, where a young boy named David first learned 3,000 years ago how to lead a people. That young shepherd became King David, and 1,000 years later, another leader was born here, in a manger over which a church was built, and to which millions of Christian pilgrims have made their way over the years. Bethlehem, a city of peace and prayers. Just outside of town, in a small chapel, Jewish women come to pray beside the tomb of Rachel the matriarch, Jacob's wife. They pray for fertility and for the safety of their children. Silent prayers to the mother of the children, Rachel. As a pearl in a crown, so sits Jerusalem, at the top of all the hills of Judea. Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Israel. Since the beginning of the century, the city has sprung from the hilltops into a unique landscape of neighborhoods, where Jews from every corner of the world have found in Jerusalem a home. And in the center of town, the great synagogue, a place for the eye and a place for the heart. In its stained glass windows are motifs from Jewish mysticism. And the soul yearns to learn, to understand, a place of beauty and a place of prayer. The Hebrew University on Mount Scopus faces the Judean desert in the east and Jerusalem in the west. Here, Jewish students will learn about the roots of their culture. A menorah on top of a hospital, the famous Hadassah Hospital, where the best researchers and the newest equipment are dedicated for curing the sick and saving life. And on top of another hill is the seat of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. In front, a 7-stick candelabra, where the history of the Jewish people is sculptured. A remembrance that out of the depths emerged a new Jewish state. And across the road, on top of another hill, is the Israel Museum, where the Dead Sea Scrolls are on display together with the best of Judaic art and with the oldest clay articles found in this ancient land. Jerusalem, the whole world in one ancient city. Here at Yad Vashem, a memorial to the 6 million Jewish victims of the Nazi death machine. There can be no words, except perhaps the Kaddish. From out of that eternal flame comes a new hope for a state of Israel where Jews will be safe. And thus the ancient prayer, "Next year in Jerusalem," comes true. Thousands come in the summer for the Israel Festival, when hundreds of world-famous artists come to perform in this amphitheater, nestled below the Tower of David, alongside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. And the sounds of David's harp are transmitted to the world from the same Elah Valley where the shepherd boy slayed Goliath. For Israel is an ancient land and a modern land, where one walks through the Bible and into the 21st century. Tel Aviv, the commercial and cultural capital of the country. Daily, thousands of commuters pour into the city on their way to conduct business and pleasure. It's a brand new city where nothing seems permanent as construction companies throw up new buildings, and the passion of commerce makes certain that everything is always in a state of flux. Tel Aviv is a city of faces, of people on the go, of immigrants whose children are giving birth to a new culture, in which the passions of Israel are expressed in architecture, music, art, and fashion. Its world-famous Philharmonic Orchestra and theaters perform as much abroad as here. It's the first Hebrew city in 2,000 years, but its pace is international. And it's a city in which names from history have meaning, for it was along these streets that history was made. For it's a city in which some of the founders are still alive, able to remember from their youth the people behind the names on the street signs, able to reminisce about the days when Israel's great metropolitan center was only a long, deserted beach. It started on yellow sand dunes. In the summer of 1906, a group of pioneers stood on the beach and wrote on seashells the names of the people and the lots of property they would build upon. That's how the first houses in Tel Aviv began. The newcomers brought their architectural styles, but combined the gables of Europe with the arches of Turkey, the porches of Germany with the domes of Jaffa, the Pillars of Italy with the mosaic of Islam. They built a city. It started small, but the streets grew long, away from the sea. And when the time finally came, the dreams of the Jewish people came true. The Jewish state was declared in Tel Aviv on the 15th of May, 1948. The celebration spilled into the streets, and the Jews poured into Israel from all over the world, received with open arms, as if it were a family reunion. But the unique history of the country and its people gripped the imagination, and visitors came from around the world to marvel at what had been accomplished. Artists were inspired to draw on the ancient motifs, to create new forms and styles that became known as uniquely Israeli. And from each group of Jews who made their way to the new state came traditions that could be made new and Israeli, like this Yemenite jeweler, whose work inspired a generation of young jewelry makers. And on the tables in restaurants, new foods appeared. And for some of them, like hummus, you really have to wipe your plate clean. When the sun comes up, Tel Avivians know it's time to go to the beach. At the Carmel Market, all the fruits and vegetables of the country are on sale, and you can get them wholesale. Just peel, slice, or squeeze to taste Israel's finest produce. A few steps from the aroma of the market is the Yemenite quarter, where the pita bread is still made the old-fashioned way. And when a bride gets married, she wears 4,000 years of Jewish culture in her gown, continuing traditions that can be traced directly back to the Bible. All our people's traditions can be seen at the Tel Aviv University campus in a unique museum, unlike any other in the world, called Beit HaTfutzot, the Diaspora Museum. Here, the history of the exile can be seen and touched. Here, children learn about the history of their people, about the prayers and traditions that kept the people alive, even when they were without a land of their own. And they learn about the synagogues the Jews built wherever they went to pray in, to mourn in, and to celebrate in. They learn about the people of Israel, dispersed over the globe, and yet held together by the same faith. Here in the museum, films can be seen showing the way Jews lived then in the shtetls of Europe or the villages of India. And when the pogroms came, the Jews packed their bags, heading for a distant land that they only knew of through the Bible. A long way from fiddlers on the rooftops were the palm trees and beaches of the land of Israel. And when the sun goes down, Tel Aviv is still on the go 24 hours a day. The city that gave birth to Tel Aviv is still there, just south of the oldest neighborhoods of the first Hebrew city. Jaffa, the oldest port in the world, where tourists and Israelis mingle at night, in a reconstructed ancient city of galleries tucked away into alleyways. Behind the gates to the shops, antique jars pulled from the sea. And in the studios, rare Judaica on display for the discerning collector. It's matched only by the modern work done by Israeli artisans. And when the shopping's over, there's no place to get fish as fresh as by the old port of Jaffa. From the narrow alleys and arches of Jaffa, the way to go is north, past the famed rich fields of the Sharon Valley, through towns built from nothing by pioneers and their descendants. To Caesarea, the city of the Roman emperors, built by King Herod 2,000 years ago, as a city to rival the great cities of ancient Rome. Here, Roman generals sent on their eastern campaigns rested before heading into battle. They relaxed at the racetrack that was here and in elaborate baths. The water came via aqueduct from hundreds of miles away. And in the amphitheater, the sports of the day were played. Nowadays, the amphitheater is used for more genteel activities, concerts under the moonlight. Also on the sea is Israel's most important port, Haifa, a city on a mountain, Mount Carmel, floating above its port at the most eastern end of the Mediterranean. Here is Israel's industrial base. And it's also the world center of the Baha'i faith, a pacifist religion founded in the last century, dedicated to peace between all religions. Here is the Baha'i Center, where pilgrims come to meditate and study. But if Jerusalem is Israel's city of prayer, and Tel Aviv the city for play, then Haifa is the city for work. The port is the busiest in Israel, and from it goes Israel's produce to the rest of the world. The favorite food for the Israelis, both adults and children, is falafel, the deep-fried chickpeas, and salad sandwich, which is stuffed into pita bread and smothered with sesame sauce. Towering above this lower section of town is the Carmel Mountain, and on the Carmel is Haifa University and the Technion, where the country's next generation of scientists is being trained. Haifa is a Middle Eastern city where the future is already now. But as always in Israel, right next to the ultra-modern is the ancient. And for Haifa, the ancient partner to the modern miracle is Akko, the fortress port where Richard the Lionhearted did battle against Saladin the Moslem, the city that ended Crusader domination, and which even Napoleon couldn't conquer. And nowadays, a city where Jews and Arabs live together peacefully. During the summer, it's home to Israel's avant-garde theater festival. And all year round, it's a city where Israelis enjoy fresh fish from the sea, cooked in the inimitable manner of the East. North, at the border with Lebanon, is Rosh Hanikra, where inside these cliffs, carved by the sea's powerful waves, is a system of caves known as the Blue Grotto of Israel. It's a surprisingly peaceful place here on the border, where tensions and troubles seem far from the mind. Here at a restaurant between the sky and the land, one can sit and enjoy the quiet of the sea. Wherever you go in this tiny country, you'll see the intersections and soldiers hitchhiking at them. These young men and women are Israel's defenders, on their way to and from home while serving to protect the country. And they're hoping to catch a ride to speed them on their way. Give them a ride. They'll be grateful for the extra few minutes it'll give them at home with their parents and friends. A little east of the seacoast, the mountains and valleys of Galilee begin with a fantastic exhibit of natural color in the blooming of wild flowers. Waterfalls bringing water from the melting snow-topped mountains in the north blend into the Jordan River, which may be narrow, but it has a long role in the history of humankind. The turbulent waters reach the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret, with its shoreline shaped like a harp. For hundreds of years, the Sea of Galilee's fishermen have been catching in their nets St. Peter's fish. Along the coastline, settlements sprouted. Farmers and fishermen who make their living from the good earth. Alongside the Kinneret is the ancient town of Tiberias, where the son of Herod the Great built a city in honor of the Roman Emperor Tiberius. After the destruction of the temple, it became the main seat of learning for the Jews, and here the Jerusalem Talmud and Mishnah were written. Here at the tomb of Rabbi Meir the miracle worker, pilgrims still come to make their prayers. Not far from the tomb are the hot springs of Tiberias, which were known already to the Romans, who built the first baths here. The clear water bubbling up from the earth has mineral properties soothing to aching backs and tired legs. After such a soothing bath, what better way to end the day than on the Tiberias boardwalk, with the water lapping the stone walls and the fish on the grill sending its tempting aroma. In the afternoon, with a cool breeze slipping down the mountains, a cruise on the lake is the way to end the day. From the ship's deck, one can see the remains of an ancient synagogue at Capernaum, evidence of a time when there was a Jewish community here in the 1st century after the fall of the temple, proof of the continuity of the Jewish presence in the land. One highlight of the cruise is a special treat for the kids, a water amusement park known as the Luna Gal, full of slides and pools. Fun's fun, but what about a nice rest? The Galilee is the place, at any of the guest houses that the kibbutzim have built, a place for rest and relaxation, and a place to meet with kibbutzniks and to share the feeling of being one nation. On the road again, we climb the Galilee Mountains to the north, to a white city on a mountaintop, Safat. It's the capital of the Galilee, a great spiritual center where Kabbalists study the mysteries of Jewish mysticism. The Ari Synagogue, named for the man who started the Kabbalist movement in the 15th century, is the center for the pilgrimage, for a mystic seeking his way to eternal truths in Safat. And alongside these students of the Torah are other people who crowned Safat as a unique town. A little further north, we're back at the Lebanese border, where on both sides of the fence, a strange paradox of war and peace is evident to the eye. Helicopters and tractors, tanks and groves, they mingle one with the other. And in between, the good fence, the symbol of a still unattained peace for both countries. The Hermon Mountain in the far north is proof of how in such a tiny country all forms of topography are possible. Israel is about 300 miles long and an average of 50 miles wide, making it about 15,000 square miles big, or actually little. Its colors change in every bend of the road, and its people, no matter how old the history of the land, are always young. Without much in the way of natural resources, Israelis have had to stretch their imagination to bring out from the difficult land such wonderful fruits as the orange known all over the world. But the incredible task for the people is the making of something out of nothing. And the brain here is the most important resource of all. The young generation is being brought up on a diet of high-tech and computers, developed for a wide range of industrial applications, including medicine, defense industries, and perhaps most specially, making energy from the sun's rays. This solar pond system has been reproduced around the world, bringing electricity to such far-flung places as America and Africa. Israeli products are being sold throughout the world, for in Israel, the future is now. But the real challenge for Israel is the making of a new society. On a stony hilltop, a new house is going up, and a new dawn is rising over Israel. And a man blesses the new day, and wearing his work clothes, he ties the leather straps of the tefillin and prays for peace for him and all Israel. His lips move as he says the prayer silently, and alongside him is the weapon he hopes he'll never have to use. And by the sweat of his brow he sows the land, so that in joy he can reap. The first fruits he devotes to God. It's an ancient people in an ancient land. Yet a new generation has returned to its sources, and the miracle has come alive. This is Israel, its people, its landscapes, and its history. A prophecy and a dream that came true. In the Promised Land, a new and modern Jewish state has been established. The only Jewish state in the world. Young faces of the young state in a country whose history is as old as human culture. Young people in a new, vibrant state. And their dream is eternal. Shalom, peace be unto you.